Not again.
A mother facing murder again and again.
And I prayed and I asked God.
2 sons taken.
To don't allow this to happen again.
Now a dramatic drop in police effectiveness across the Southland that could mean less justice for your family too.
Was that drop concerning?
Well, absolutely.
Only on 2, a CBS News Los Angeles national investigation, crime without punishment.
Well, CBS has discovered it is a problem across the country and right here in L.A.
In fact, police call it the homicide clearance rate, but most everyone calls it the case solve rate. By the way, we now know it dropped off a cliff in 2020. Senior reporter Ross Palumbo has details now. He discovered in the crime data something that you will see only on CBS 2.
Well, this is critical information that police themselves use to find out exactly how well they themselves are doing. Now, when we poured through the data, we found a dramatic drop in homicide cases getting cleared or solved. In 2020, in fact, only about half of all of those cases were solved. Half. Now, that affects all of us. When killers remain on the loose, it's hitting one family especially hard tonight.
Never in a million years would I even think that I would be in the position that I'm in now today.
Standing between 2 gravestones for 2 lost sons.
I miss both of you guys so much.
And mother Barbara Pritchett is now caught in the middle of another crisis.
That's the last thing that you would even imagine for your children.
Her child, Devon Hughes, was first caught in the crossfire here outside of a church in 2007.
My 15-year-old son was shot one time in the head and died.
And how long did it take him to find the shooter for Devon?
Within 4 days.
And that person went to jail?
That person went to jail and is in jail to this day.
And after that day, after 3,321 days of mourning, some 9 years later, more gunshots again finding her family.
He was standing right here. The people came from the front shooting. Gunshot holes on the wall. She found him laying right here dead.
Found dead just steps away from her front door, her second son, DeAndre Hughes.
Not again. Not again. And I prayed and I asked God to don't allow this to happen again.
Again, there was anguish, but this time there was additional agony.
How long was it until you started thinking about who did it? Was it right away?
Right away.
What did you think? Did you think we're going to get this one too?
Yes.
But they never got this gunman.
This is him as a baby.
Now, nearly 6 years later, with nothing but memories now sitting beside her.
I cry because there's so many memories of him.
DeAndre's murder remains unsolved.
I would constantly call the detective.
Any clues?
Nothing.
Any progress?
Nothing.
Any developments?
Nothing. To this day, I still don't know who's the person responsible for killing my son 100% for sure.
Will her son's killer ever be found?
It's our hope. The reality is that 2 decades ago, the department was one of the first in the country to establish a cold case homicide unit.
And during the last decade, LAPD has established itself as a top agency solving, or as they say, clearing homicides.
LAPD is actually performing above the national average.
Oh, absolutely. It's been a matter that we're quite proud of.
The homicide clearance rate is something that you are probably updated on, what, every week, every month? How important is that number to you?
It's a critical number.
After analyzing that critical clearance rate for weeks using FBI crime data, CBS 2 has plotted out its rise and fall over the last 25 years. When Devon Hughes was murdered in 2007, our analysis finding that LAPD's rate was on average on a 7-year climb, and his case was quickly solved. But beginning in 2013, there was a dramatic decline in Los Angeles, and by the time DeAndre Hughes was murdered in 2016, the overall trend was already going down, and DeAndre's case does remain unsolved. And by 2020, the last year the data is available, the clearance rate dropped in LA from a 5-year average of around 74% down to 55%, a 25% drop.
Was that drop concerning?
Well, absolutely.
I mean, when you first saw that number, what was your first thought?
Our thought was we've got to bring more resources to this, and what is an underlying influence?
LA County had an even bigger drop, its clearance rate falling more than 28%. The state fared better, but still dropped around 14%. And nationally, the drop was even less severe, but the clearance rate still went down 11% compared to the previous 5-year average. The most dramatic fall happened in the first months following the May 2020 police murder of George Floyd. For the first time in history, the rate pushed down below 50%. LAPD seeing the same dramatic drop. Chief Moore believes a rise in homicides, a decline in resources, the pandemic, and civil unrest are all factors, and adds that a drop in community trust was key.
The solving of a crime, of a homicide particularly, is dependent on a community trusting the police.
But trust is hard when there is inequity. And when it comes to solving homicides, another look at the data shows it has been racially and ethnically unequal almost everywhere. In 2020, the national homicide clearance rate for white victims was 87%, but for black victims it was only 59%, and for Hispanic victims 67%. In California, for the same groups, you can see disparities from 75% to 44% to 51%. In LA County, it was 75%, 23%, 36%. LAPD's numbers were 67% for white victims, 43% for black victims, and 43% for Hispanic victims. That all boils down to a 24-point difference for families like Barbara's.
I believe it.
What do you think when you hear that?
It's not fair. Homicide is homicide. And we all deserve to have justice for our children.
Is there an element of racism?
Yeah, racism is real. It's there.
But the reality, LAPD says, is that it treats all cases the same.
We never give up. Those individuals all represent lost lives, and they leave behind families and friends, and what we hope to do is solve them at some point.
Now, despite what the numbers say about solving her son's murder,
My children is laying over in Inglewood Cemetery.
Mother Barbara Pritchett can only focus on $50,000 in new reward money, hoping that's the only number that will now matter.
You think they're ever going to find who killed your son?
I have faith. I don't know. I love your son. I wouldn't wish this pain on nobody.
Well, LAPD Chief Michael Morris says that they now have the clearance rate numbers back from 2021, and it's moved back up more than 10 points and now stands at 66%. He believes that that's partially because of staffing going back up at LAPD. As for the Sheriff's Department and their much, much lower numbers, we reached out to Sheriff Alex Villanueva, even tried to ask him about their huge racial disparities during a live social media event today, and so far have gotten zero response. And I have to tell you, Pat and Jeff, when it comes to the LASD numbers, those were some of the lowest that we saw across the entire country. And when it comes to racial disparity, those were some of the widest gaps that we saw across the entire country.
That took a lot of work. That was really eye-opening information, and to get the data that you did and crunching those numbers. Thanks.
Thanks a lot. It tells the story.
For that reality. All right, thank you, Ross.
Of course.
And our Crime Without Punishment investigation continues tonight. On the CBS Evening News, Jim Axelrod goes inside the Philadelphia Homicide Unit as it grapples with a mass shooting investigation.
Then tomorrow on CBS News, or CBS Mornings rather, you will hear from dozens of relatives of the murder victims in Jackson, Mississippi, who say that they are frustrated with police and they're taking it upon themselves to investigate.